everyone. This is Kim Bussey. I'm your Key Relationship Manager here with Omnia. And I'm very excited to be co-presenting with Wendy Schaefer today. Wendy is our SVP of Operations. Why don't you say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi. So I'm the SVP of Operations here at Omnia. I've been here 20 years, so it's like it was just yesterday. But I'm very excited to talk about how to build an unstoppable team with you today.
Absolutely wonderful. So let's start off with this. So outlook determines outcome. So at the top of your screen, there's an icon of a person with their hand raised. Go ahead. If you agree with me, select agree. If you disagree with this statement, select disagree. So do you think that outlook determines outcome? Agree or disagree? So for me, I agree with this statement. I think it's proven, especially when it comes to conflict. I know if I come in, I may have a day where I'm just feeling a little salty and it just seems like nothing works well, especially if I've had some of those outside conversations with kids or with a spouse, and that's just gotten me off on the wrong foot. But Wendy, what about you? Agree or disagree with this statement?
Totally agree. I just wrote that in the comment section. Yes, and it's so funny because I have an 8-year-old son, Benji, who, I don't think he understands this phrase, outlook determines outcome, but he lives by it somehow internally. So I'm dropping him off today, and my dad's like, so what kind of day are we going to have today? So it all depends on Benji's mood. And so I really work a lot to try to get him into a positive frame of mind, because once he starts to feel negative, it kind of spirals out of control. So I definitely think it's true.
And I agree with that, with my 10-year-old, once she's gone to that downward spiral, all bets are off. Everything is like the greatest tragedy. And love this comment as well. Direction determines destination. So if you have comments, type them in. I agree with both of these. So outlook determines outcome, as I said, especially when we think about conflict. So I want you to take a moment. By the way, if I did not mention it, I will mention it now. This is going to be interactive. Wendy and I are going to ask some questions, ask you to raise your hands, agree, disagree, type in the chat box. So listen up, and this is where we're going to start. I want you to think about the word conflict for a moment and all the negative words that come with that. So think of conflict in a negative. What words do you associate with conflict that you think of negative words? So go ahead and type that in the upper left-hand box. So on our, so I see arguments. What else do we have? So we have arguments, we have strife, we have confrontation, anger, hurt feelings. Absolutely. Stop. I like this. I'm just not going to go there. What else do we have with people? Disagreements, confrontation. Absolutely. For me, when I think about conflict negatively, I think about it as this, fight or flight stance of I've got to stand my ground. I love that drama. Absolutely. So, save your drama for your mama. I hate that statement because I am a mama and I don't want your drama. What about you, Wendy? Do you want drama coming your way?
No, I do not, but it comes my way anyway.
So, and when you think about it, there are studies that show how we view certain aspects in certain situations affect us physically. So when you start thinking about conflict negatively, think about how you're feeling right now. Did that fight or flight response kick in? Is it something that you're just like, you feel like your hands are getting a little clammy or sweaty or your heart's racing a little bit? All of that affects your outcome, right? For me, I'm a little bit better with conflict. So I can deal with it. Let's deal with it right away. But even then, I don't wake up and go, today I want to have conflict with somebody. I still want to think through it, and I tend to think about what are some of the negative aspects. What if I'm trying to compromise and this other person isn't? Now let's flip the script a little bit. And I see people are jumping ahead, which is great, but go ahead and type in what are some of the positive words that you associate with conflict. So let's change our outlook from negative to positive. So resolution, moving forward, teamwork, opportunity, It is a challenge, but it's challenges for solutions and teamwork. I love that. Moving forward, it's uniqueness. Yes, all of us have our innate natural behavioral traits, what we refer to in a perfect world or in times of stress. And, that tends to be how we look at conflict as well. As I said, I tend to look at conflict as a pretty positive thing. I'm not going to run from it. Let's just address it right away. More willing to take a risk and have some of those difficult conversations. Wendy, what do you think about conflict?
What do I think about conflict? For me, it's really difficult. I'm gonna put this back on. Sorry. For me, with conflict, because I'm not a naturally assertive person, I definitely shy away from it. And I start to get very anxious when I think that I have to go up and talk to somebody to resolve an issue that we have. So, like you were saying before, that whole personality type driving how you look at it, I look at it oftentimes in a much more negative way. And so I get really, like I said, I get really anxious. I get nervous. I start to think about the worst case scenarios. That's like my biggest thing is the worst case scenario thinking, to the point where I get myself so upset, and then I go and talk it out with somebody, and it's never as bad as you thought it was going to be. So I think that's the biggest thing for me, is always thinking that it's going to be so much worse than it is and having it worked out. So I think going into when we're talking about as leaders, how you view conflict is going to influence how your team looks at it. So if you can look at it in a positive way and approach it as resolution and compromise and working things out, then your team will start to look at it that way as well. Because I think, too many times we let conflict go. We're ignoring the warning signs because we are fearful of getting in there and having that out, at least with my personality type. So we might ignore the warning signs or just say, well, let's see if it will work itself out. And sometimes I think we might not notice the signs right away too. So some of those signs might be very subtle, such as coworkers who really aren't talking to each other as much as they might have talked to each other in the past. So as a leader, I might look at that and go, well, just everybody's getting along, they're doing their jobs. Yeah, there's a little less exchange, but maybe that's just because they're busy. So I will oftentimes start to put in these excuses that there's no conflict going on. This is really what's happening. And again, that's because of my non-assertive outlook. And so I might see those signs of tension and choose to ignore it. And as a leader, I know that I really need to stop doing that because ignoring it is the worst thing that you can do. We have to recognize the conflict, set some rules, get our team together, and work through it. And so, I think if you don't do that, what's going to happen is somebody is going to come into your office where they're just past that point of no return, which is we don't want to get there. We don't want to have a letter of resignation on our desk because we weren't able to help people recognize conflict, see it as a positive thing, and work through it.
You're absolutely correct, Wendy, and that's where we're going to talk about using that conflict to build an unstoppable team. So we've got to first, as leaders, understand how we deal with conflict, what are the common sources of conflict, and it's not necessarily person to person. There's some fundamental differences when we look at the departments that make up our team. And I love this statement by Steve Jobs, and it says, "My model for business is the Beatles. There were four guys who kept each other's negative tendencies in check. They balanced each other, and the total was greater than the sum of the parts." And that's really what it's about, is how do we learn as leaders to help our teams balance each other out, there's always going to be negativity. There's always going to be disagreements. But how do we balance that out so that what we achieve, contributing to the company's bottom line, to be greater than the sums? And as he continues to say, that's how I see business. Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. And when we look at this, we're going to talk about some of the things. And Paul, you're correct. Some normal expected conflict is forming, storming, norming, and performing. We actually talk about that in a different webinar. And what we're going to talk about is really focusing today on those two areas, the two departments that tend to have the most conflict. But once we can help them understand what is going on, how those behavior differences help you as a leader understand what those natural behavioral traits are and help them work together, it helps you take the team to the next level. Because a lot of times it's all about perspective.
Yeah, so when you look at this picture, what do you see? If you could type in the chat box, what do you see when you look at this slide? Anybody? Yeah. See, I totally see a frog every time I look at this picture as well. But for the people that are saying frog, sadness. For the people that are seeing a frog, if you actually tilt your head a little bit to the right, you'll see the horse. And a lot of people can see the horse right away too. And so the interesting thing about this is perspective. So the way that you change your perspective just a little bit, you can see a totally different picture. And it took me the longest time to see the horse. I got to tell you, I'm like, no, that's a frog. It's only a frog. There's nothing else there. He's sitting on a lily pad. But honestly, if you just switch your head a little bit, you can see this horse, and then you can't unsee it. So I think that's the thing about conflict, and we put it in a workplace context, and we try to look at things from other people's perspectives. It will help us to solve problems much more easily, and that's what Omnia does with personality type. Is if we can understand our innate behaviors and why we see things the way we see things, and then we can understand why other people see things the way that they do, it will allow us to kind of just open up our minds a little bit and try to see things from other people's perspective. And I think this picture is just a great illustration of how that works. And we're going to talk, like Kim said, we're going to talk about the two groups of people that oftentimes have a very natural source of conflict because they have two very different jobs, and that's sales and customer service. And in any business, you're going to have some sort of sales team and some sort of product fulfillment customer service team. So we're using that because we think everybody will be able to we'll see what that's like in your own business. Kim, did you want to add anything about the frog and the horse?
No, I love that, but with the perspective, for me, and it's funny that even though I know that the horse is there now, the frog automatically jumps out to me, and I always have to tilt my head a little bit to the right to see the horse. And it goes back to that, exactly what you said, Wendy, about our natural perspective. So even though we can walk a mile in someone else's shoes, even though we can understand each other's natural behavioral traits, as Wendy said, it's something that Omnia helps us with, we have to make an everyday effort to understand. And you as leaders, who you're trying to use this natural conflict that happens, you have to make that everyday effort to say, what can I do to help the team work together better, to build that great team? If you're a leader who tends to be a little bit more on that salesy side, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to see it from the service aspect, because you're naturally built to automatically, I just noticed the frog. And vice versa. If you're a leader that falls a little bit more on that service side of things, or you naturally avoid conflict, is that everyday development that you have to do for yourself personally to understand those strengths and challenges to continue to grow. And like I said, every single time I see this picture, my head automatically tilts a little bit to the right. But let's talk about it. So we're going to focus today on the dynamics between sales and service, or service and support. So every organization has someone who's focused on sales. They've got to bring in the new clients. They've got to go out and prospect and network. And then you have, that support, whether it's accounting, it's that receptionist, it's truly as customer service, or even in a manufacturing industry, you have someone who's building the widgets. That is what we would consider more of that service. So think about your company and think about where these two people would fall into play. So most of the time, salespeople perspective is all about what they do. So we always look at the what's in it for me factor, right? So As a salesperson, I'm thinking I drive the business and carry the team. If I don't bring in new people, then our company is going to suffer because, I've got to bring in new clients to generate dollars, which generates those bottom lines. And many times it's I've got people to see, goals to meet, deals to close. I don't really have time for a lot of the details. I see the importance of my role, right? So I've got to bring it in. I've got deals to make. I've got to, work that prospect list, work that sales pipeline. Because if I don't, who's going to do it? If you notice, I'm focusing on my strengths, what I bring to the team. But my coworkers who are in service and support may not view me the same way. Right, Wendy?
Correct. And for anyone who doesn't know this, Kim and I have totally opposite personality types. She definitely has the more sales-oriented personality type, the assertiveness, the independence, that big picture outlook. And I am definitely more the support type, that cautious, team-oriented outlook, detail-oriented, a little more methodical, which we'll get into. But we're really good to sort of tag team off of this because we are polar opposites. So, but yes, when I work with salespeople in particular, I do oftentimes look at the more negative qualities because I'm looking at it from my lens. I see them as unorganized, bossy, always waiting to the last minute to give me stuff. And when they do give me things, it doesn't have all of the information that I need to get it done. So I can get very frustrated with that. It's like, you don't give me any details, but I'm supposed to turn around and return it to you a particular way. Of course, it's like, I'm not a mind reader. So if you don't tell me the direction I need to take or how you want this completed, then where do I go from there? So that's really a huge source of frustration between the service and support and sales, is not getting enough information. So I know I was thinking about this the other day. What are the side effects that I feel from working with salespeople who don't understand why I need information? And I can tell you what they are right now. Irritation, uncontrollable sarcasm. So I tend to get a little sarcastic when they're talking to me. Refusal to be steamrolled, because even before they come in the door, I'm like, I'm not going to just let them roll over me and tell me to do something and not tell me how. And then a lot of defensiveness, which was right there. The defensiveness came right into it. And as a detail-oriented person, I have a naturally high defensiveness in me. And then also, of course, tension headaches from the frequent last-minute requests. So these are some of the things that we're feeling in service and support.
Which is why I keep a bottle of Tylenol in my desk to share with her, because I'm usually the one that's giving her those tension headaches. So
she does. I go in there all the time for it. So how we see ourselves, though, is very different. It's like Kim was saying, when you're talking about a salesperson and they see what they're bringing to the table, service and support is going to do the same thing. We're going to look at it and say, well, here's what we do. I mean, we're supporting the sales team. We're supporting other teams. We're keeping our clients happy. We're solving problems. We're keeping compliance happy. All of these things are super important. But I think the biggest thing is that I'll look at it and go, okay, because sales brings the customers in, but we keep them happy. And so we keep them coming back. We keep them buying more. And so I look at retention as a huge help to sales, because if I'm retaining customers, sales can go out and literally bring in new business rather than having to keep making up ground from lost business. So I'm looking at that synergy between the two of us and what we can do together. And then also, of course, still from a bit of an ego lens as well, like, well, we're the backbones. What would you do without us, kind of a thing. So you can see where the conflict just in the job type, the job responsibilities can create conflict. Never mind the personality types, but when we put that in there, we're really talking about right ground for conflict. And as a naturally, again, non-confrontational person, I really do avoid conflict. And so what that means, though, is that a lot of us in service and support who tend to avoid it can oftentimes feel very resentful of having of avoiding it, even though we're not being forced to because we naturally do it. We tend to build up some resentment, and then it does come out in unfortunate ways. So there might be a little bit of snippiness and defensiveness, and it overflows. So I think as a leader, being able to help that service and support to speak up a little bit in a way that's comfortable for them, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, might also help solve some problems.
Because when that salesperson receives that snippiness, here's what they typically do. They're assertive enough to either A, be very direct and blunt with that person, which automatically now is creating conflict where you're just too touchy, or they wind up in your office saying, Wendy is defensive every time I can't get my job done because every time she does something, I ask her to do something, I get just 40 questions and I don't have time to answer all the questions. I don't understand why she can't do it, and some of the side effects on my thing is frustration or that aggression that's coming out where, once again, especially if you have someone who's feeling, I'm the top performer and feeling a little entitled, which is a different subject for a different day, which we're going to address next week with toxic employees, but they may come across as aggressive. No, I'm the top performer and you're going to do what I need you to do because if not, I'm going to walk. And now other people might, oh, no. If they go away, what's going to happen? So we've got to make sure that the aggression, because of the responses that are coming from sales or service, or the perceived responses, can come across as aggression, impatience. Can you just go do it? Or prolonged exposure to questions may trigger excessive eye rolling. Whether it's an internal eye rolling or external eye rolling. Why are they asking so many questions? Now, when we take a step back and we help our teams understand how they come together and work together, then we begin to see them starting to build that great culture together, that unstoppable team. Because let me tell you, as a sales personality, I don't want to do what Wendy does. I love coming up with the ideas and I've had to learn to take a step back and say, okay, Wendy, what are your questions that you have for me? Because I know that together we're going to create an amazing product or an amazing consulting service for our clients. But if I didn't lower my defenses and recognize my challenges, then that's not going to happen. Wendy, on the other hand, as someone who's freely admits she's completely opposite of me, if she doesn't recognize my strengths in that, yes, I'm going out and I may come in and scare her at times going, hey, guess what I just sold? And she's got to figure out how to do it. She understands that my contributions to the bottom line is critical. So we've got to create that synergy where we work together. But it starts with having each person, understand their individual strengths, but then also understanding the strengths of the other person as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, we're talking about the strengths of the sales team. They are goal oriented. They play to win. They want to go out there and bring in new business. And every time they make a score for themselves, they're making a score for the company. And so we're bringing in revenue. They're proactive about it. They're resilient. They can brush off setbacks. I mean, it would be terrible if I was in a sales position because the first time somebody says, no, I don't want to buy from you, I'm probably not going to be able to make that next call for like 3 days. So you want somebody who's resilient, who can go out there, bounce right back and start asking for the next sale. And then they're fast paced. And they need to be. And when you've got a sales team, they're out there in the field or they're on the phones and prospects are changing appointment times or asking if they can, come in 15 minutes later so they have to reschedule other appointments. And then, of course, they're big picture. And like Kim was saying, visionary. She'll come into me with ideas. And I joke about the maniacal laugh. What did you sell now that we don't currently do, but that we're going to do. So understanding those strengths and how positive they are to our bottom line and to the team It's super important as a service person to understand how positive those traits are, even if they might in the day-to-day logistics drive me a little bit crazy. And it's the same with support. So, sales can look at what the service and support team also brings to the table. Is that team-oriented, collaborative behavior? Because Kim will come into my office and we'll talk about some product ideas. We'll have to talk through the details and the logistics of it, and what's the time frame? What kind of staffing do we have to finish this project? What other things do we have on the table for clients right now? So where can we slot this in? And so it's kind of breaking it down. And it is a collaborative process, so I can understand, what she's told to the client and how we can make that work. So bringing that patience and thoroughness to it so that when we do roll out the product, the consulting service, and we're going to go on site with our client, we're ready for every contingency. And so that's where the detail-oriented comes in, making sure that we, dot every I, cross every T. And then very good at structure and follow-up, so that, we can make sure the salespeople can go out and keep bringing in that new business, and we can follow up on the details. And then, of course, accuracy and compliance, because that's one of the big ways that we're going to retain business, is making sure that we are doing things correctly and that we're doing things, we're making sure that everything's right for the client, that they don't have to ask us to fix mistakes. So that's going to increase retention. So really, what happens there is just understanding the innate behaviors of each person on the teams and what that brings to the team is so important. And also for every strength that someone brings, recognizing that there is going to be a challenge associated with it. So because people are very fast-paced or very assertive, there might be some downsides to that. Maybe it comes off as a little bit of bossiness, or I'm not waiting around for something. And also there are some individuals whose strengths can turn into liabilities because it's so dominant. It's like, I'm not just assertive, but I'm really aggressive and forceful. And so understanding how to help people temper some of those really strong behaviors in their personality when they're working with someone else. And that's really good even for if they're working with a prospect and they might be overly aggressive, to tone it down so that they're not turning people off. And the same with the service person. If you're being overly detail-oriented, where you're asking questions about stuff that isn't going to matter, then you're just going to frustrate that other person. So it works both ways, too. You can be so helpful that you border on being timid to where you're afraid to be proactive and show some initiative. So for every strength, you want to make sure that it doesn't turn into a challenge, or you don't let that get out of control. Because the stronger a behavior is and the more we let it dominate us and not try to temper things, is a bigger cause for conflict as well. And so let's talk about, these are the strengths, although I did go into challenges, Kim, so I'm sorry. See, that's that detail-oriented, like, not missing anything, but you'll talk about the challenges more in depth.
That's okay. Take it all. It's fine. But it is. It's kind of hard to talk about the strengths without talking about the challenges, especially, with Omnia, we are a behavioral assessment consulting company. So we see this every single day. So raise your hand if some of this sounds familiar. If you have any of this conflict or just differences because of the different personality types that you have in the roles. And that's a good thing. Like, we want to make sure that we're hiring for the position. As leaders, we've got to help, not only we have to understand the challenges of that, but help our teams understand the challenges of that. We have to help our sales team understand, here's what you have to be self-aware about yourself. And then here's what you have to adapt and apply to work together. And I love that, between creative and account leaders, especially. You have those free spirits who are very creative. And then you have those account leaders who are like, let's think about it in hard sales. Because some of the challenges for sales is those routines, those long-term goals, the details. They like to think outside the box. Your service and support, their challenges are thinking outside the box. They want to make sure that they know what's happening and that there's not constant change, which in a sales world, change is the name of the game. And so as a leader, the first thing you have to do is, one, help your team understand how that goes together. help them understand these are the strengths that they bring to the team, but these are the challenges. You are complete opposites. Now, what do we need to do to come together? And as a manager, you can't manage with one size fits all. So, especially, when I started with Omnia, Wendy was my supervisor for a while. And, one of the things that I did was, keep in mind, very different is how we communicate. I emailed her and said, hey, I want to let you know I'm taking this time off, for PTO. Are you okay with it? And just shot her a quick email because it was quick, it was easy. I was moving on to something else. But Wendy, when you received that email, what were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking, first of all, I kind of remember differently too. I think what was missing was the piece, and I think it was in your head is, are you okay with this? It's just kind of like, I'm taking this off. And so for me, I think I wrote back and was like, well, we're supposed to ask and check and make sure we have enough coverage and all of that. So I didn't know that you had already done that. And so that's, that was the thing that was missing is Kim had already gone through. She checked our out of office calendar, made sure that we were fully staffed. I didn't know that. And so I thought she was just telling me how it was going to go. And so, of course, I got a little thickly about that. So, and that's the thing about email, too, is that sometimes we really don't put a bunch of information in there because we have to type out a book. And so I think what I was doing is filling in gaps with my own perspective, and she was filling in gaps with hers. And that's how, I think our first, really, that was one of our very first conflicts together, too, Kim, is kind of working out how we needed to communicate with each other. And then from there on out, it's been roses.
Yes, it's been sunshine and roses the whole time. That was the first of many little conflicts, I will have to say. But some of it came from learning each other because when she's sent back, most of the time people ask. In my mind, I had asked for it. I had done everything that she was going to tell me to do. So at that moment, we could have let that just simmer there and cause us not to, okay, well, fine, if that's the way it's going to be, I'll make sure I ask her. I won't check anything anymore. I'll just say, are you, I would like to have this time off. Is that okay with you? Please approve my time off, which could have caused her frustration because her response may have been like either looking at all that stuff herself or ask me, did you do all of this? But instead, what we did is we stopped and we went and talked to each other and said, okay, well, I didn't mean disrespect. I checked everything. I was just, from my understanding, is that if you check everything and everything's good, that it's okay just to kind of put it on the out of office. And, Wendy's response, which this was 6 years ago, so I don't remember word for word, was basically like, I'm fine with that, but can you tell me about it first and then just double check that it's okay that someone else hasn't come to me in the meantime. And so it was that communication piece. And a lot of times communication is missing when we find that conflict. Communication is missing. And then as a leader, the other thing that is missing is managing to the individual. Because you have different personality styles on your team, you've got to help them understand and coach them a little bit differently. Right, Wendy?
Absolutely. And I think this can get a little complex because we have to manage to the individual. And we're also going to have to coach them on how to interact with other individuals. So what I kind of look at it from that two-dimensional aspect. So when I'm working with a salesperson as a leader, I know that because they're very independent and they like to have sort of looser guidelines with lots of latitude to make decisions, that it's important then that we define what the non-negotiable, what the hard rules might be for compliance reasons, for example. So here are the things that have to be done, and here's where you have a lot of leeway. Also, because they're very individually driven and motivated by that win, you want to tie incentives into their performance metrics, make sure that they have opportunities to compete. Like for salespeople, of course, that's why sales contests work so well. It's that opportunity to compete with other people and rise to the top. And then, of course, they give the latitude to reach goals, which is kind of up there with the first thing that we just talked about. And then based on their communication style, you might manage with a little bit more of a motivational pep or with a little more like concrete job specific feedback. So it depends on that. But also, then you want to coach them for communicating with the service and support side. So because they're very assertive and because they tend to be big picture, you might want to coach them on communicating with more specifics. So when you're dealing with the service or support side, if you don't want 100 questions, here are some of the things that you can give to the service team ahead of time to avoid them coming back and asking you a bunch of questions. So just coaching them on how to deal with other individuals as part of that management process, I think will go a really long way to avoiding conflict even. So with service and support, how we manage those individuals is first off, we want to give them a lot of feedback, a lot of concrete, specific direction. We tend as service and support people to like structure. So I really like to understand what the parameters are. So the clearer those are, the better I'm going to be able to function within those parameters. But that means also empowering them to recognize the gray areas because there's always going to be gray areas. So what can I do when I come up on that? If it is something that's within my authority level to make a decision on, tell me that and I'll do it. Or if it's something that I need to go ahead and ask somebody about, then that's fine too. And then also recognize their contributions to the team, what they're bringing to the whole. But again, like we were talking about coaching, now you also want to coach your service and support to work with sales and understand what sales needs. So if service wants to, for example, avoid a lot of last minute requests, then maybe it would be a good idea for them to put together what a timeline would look like for them. You know, here's the amount of time I need to turn around a new client entry or an order fulfillment for XYZ product. And maybe sales just isn't familiar with the process that's involved, and they're probably not interested in the full process. But if you just say, hey, here's how many days lead time I need, and communicate that to the sales team, it might at least cut down on some of those last minute requests because there's always going to be emergencies and crises that people can't control, and that's okay. But we want to make that more the one-off than the everyday occurrence, because when it's every day, then you're going to have that conflict and resentment build up. So what can we do as a leader, Kim, to work with that? That sounded very aggressive. I didn't mean for it to.
Yes. What can we do? Well, the first thing I want you to remember is the 3 T's. So as a leader, you've got to think of the 3 T's: tone, teach, and track. So once you understand, A, what your leadership styles are, what your strengths and challenges are, and then 2, help your team understand their strengths and challenges and those innate differences that come together to complement and create an amazing, unstoppable team. You've got to help them with understanding now what the next steps are. So the first one is the tone. As a leader, and we talked about this, you set the tone of the office. If you may hate to handle conflict, you can't wait and hope that it all goes away. If you are someone that just wants to jump in immediately, you have to make sure that you're like, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath. We're going to teach our team how it's conflict. So the first tone is that it's handled in a positive manner, and I'm going to set expectations. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to teach not only myself when to my triggers, so that's that self-awareness, what my strengths, what my challenges are, what my triggers for conflict are, but also how to manage them. And then you're also going to teach your team to understand that as well. And then you're going to track. So when it comes to conflict, you want to track the source of the conflict and the participants. So is this something that I can come in and change? Is it something that is beyond our control and now we need to come up with a solution to look around it? Do I have that toxic employee that no matter what anyone else says or does, they're just not willing to compromise? Is their way or the highway? And are they what we like to call here in the South, the pot stirrer? You know, that person who likes to go in and be like, hey, Wendy, I really can't believe that Kim said that to you in the meeting. And Wendy may be thinking, I heard what she said. It didn't really bother me, but maybe it should have bothered me,
Now it bothers me.
Exactly. Now it bothers me. Or I go to vent to Wendy and go, I'm really frustrated. I just got done talking with, Tanya and about this presentation, and she was just telling me that I think that you need to do this, this, and this, and I don't really like the way this is phrased, and I worked really hard on it. Wendy could either say, this is some, these are great points, and I'm sure Tanya meant it out of a place of helping you get better. Or Wendy could say something else that's like, oh, I can't believe she said that to you either. This presentation is perfect, So you've got to track down that source and who's participating in the conflict. If the source is that they truly just don't understand who they are, or it's a lack of knowledge, we can coach that. If it's something that it's toxic people, then you're going to have to coach that too, but maybe you're coaching it in a different way. Maybe you're coaching it to say, okay, if these behaviors don't change, we're coaching you out. Because an unstoppable team has 4 things. They have self-awareness, both as a team and individual. They have self-management, and that's all about the individual. Communication and relationships. And as the leader, you are the linchpin. You are the center of this. So before that team can work together towards conflict resolution, everyone has to look inward to understand themselves first. And you've got to lead by example. So ask yourself, what motivates me? How do I communicate? As I said, what are my triggers that cause me to work harder, become frustrated, or make me just want to walk away? And is that something that I can change? And that's where that self-management piece comes into play. So think about it this way. I'm driving my car, and I notice that I am almost on empty. That's being self-aware. My car is almost out of gas. But if I don't put more gas in my car, I'm going to wind up on the side of the road, right? So just because I know I need more gas, if I don't take action, then the consequence is going to be I'm running out of gas and I'm on the same side of the road. Self-awareness and self-management is the same thing. I can be aware of what my negative traits are. I can be aware of what my triggers are. But if I'm not doing anything to develop and change my behaviors, then it doesn't really matter that I'm self-aware or not. It all goes down to being aware of who that is. So self-management is when that individual person realizes what their triggers are and they have the ability to control that disruptive, unprotective, and harmful emotions and behaviors. As a team, they're going to help self-manage each other as well. So maybe your sales team comes together and says, we're not going to overpromise something. We're going to make sure that we put practices in place so that we're not taxing our service team. Here at Omnia, we have a great synergy between sales and service, but we didn't always have that. Our salespeople used to say, they would promise new clients all the time. You're going to get a call in just a few hours or in a few minutes to get you set up on the system. What they didn't realize is that it's not this instantaneous thing that goes from sales to service. New accounts make a stop in accounting, who has to get them set up on our system. And so our salespeople were promising something that our service team couldn't deliver, and it was affecting the attitude and the synergy, because our service team is like, we want to do what we need to do. We're all about helping the client, and we want to reach these unrealistic goals. So instead of letting that negativity breed, we put some parameters in place. One, we educated our sales team to say, here is the sales process. And any new salesperson that joins our team is immediately walked through that. You close a sale, here it goes to accounting. Here's everything accounting needs to do to get it set up in the system. And then it goes to service. We also put some time frames around that. So once again, being aware of what the issue was and then managing it to say that your service that we will contact, if it's set up, if the account is open before noon, they'll be called by the end of the day. If it's after that, it's within 24 hours. So we worked well together, but we realized, okay, what is the difference? Where do we need to come together? And then we communicated that. So once again, we have to be able to be self-aware. We have to self-manage. We have to communicate those differences. And the communication piece, honestly, is probably one of the toughest pieces to get a team to come together, because I can be aware of who I am. I can manage my triggers, but how I communicate can automatically drive someone crazy.
Absolutely. I mean, communication is at the core of everything. And no matter what you're trying to achieve, from conflict resolution, team building, working with a new person, whatever it might be, communication is always going to be your foundation. So poor communication, even with good intentions, can be completely disastrous. And I'm going to go into the relational and analytical, but I do want to say that oftentimes when we think about communication, we're thinking about it's just us conveying information to someone else. We don't always think about how people need to receive information in order for them to work most effectively. So effective dialogue to me might mean something different than it means to Kim. So what works for one person may not work for another. And it's important to recognize the needs and values of each member of your team so that you can resolve conflict. And I always like to say, hopefully just avoid it altogether. So often at work, we don't consider how someone needs to get that. But if you think about interactions outside of work, I use this example all the time. If you think about how you communicate with a 7-year-old versus a 17-year-old. So the little one wants to know everything, right? The why behind the what. Why is the sky blue? Why are some roads called interstates? Why do I have to eat dinner? Why do I have to take baths? Why do I have to wash my hands with soap? Guess we have a theme here. My son baffles me. He doesn't like those things. But your teenager, for example, barely wants to know anything, right? They already know it all. So you really have to cut out a lot of details to keep their attention. And personalities really can work the same way. So some members of your team really just want you to lay it out, that final outcome. What's the end game? What do I need to do? While others want to know the outcome and the steps that you use to get at that outcome. And so it's like that joke where it's like, I want to know the time, not how the watch was made. If you're like my husband, you want to know how the watch was made, who made it, the materials they used, how they market it, how they distribute it. So I'm really not kidding about that. So if you understand your teammate and what type of specifics they need, and understanding that they're not questioning your ability, they're not trying to slow your roll, they just are trying to get some reassurance for themselves so that they can drive confidence. And so awareness of your communication style and the communication styles of those on your team will really build that foundation for how to resolve conflict. Also, there's the relational and the analytical. So I went off on a tangent there. But relational types really do focus on emotion, feelings, interaction. They're animated. They like to talk things out. Whereas analytics are very factual, direct. They like to think things through. So it can cause a bit of conflict when a relational person goes over to an analytic and just starts talking, because the analytic oftentimes wants to have an opportunity to think it out rather than talk it out. So if they think it out first, then they can go and talk. Whereas a relational person wants to just start brainstorming out loud. And so we can sort of start to get our wires crossed because nobody knows what stage they're in, if you will, of an idea. And so understanding that, and also with communication communication methods, I should say. So email, like Kim and I were saying earlier, it doesn't have a tone. Sometimes we're going to read an email based on our mood that day. So if I'm feeling particularly salty that day, then I might not put the best lens on the email, the best filter. So it'd be better for me to pick up the phone, walk over to someone's office, and talk it out. And so looking at methods, looking at whether or not you've got a relational person versus an analytical person, and understanding sometimes that the way people communicate isn't necessarily negative towards us. A relational person might view an analytic as being very direct and blunt, but that's just how they are. They don't have any malice behind it. Whereas an analytic might look at a relational person and go, they just want to come over and maybe waste my time or talk this out when we don't need to. And really, that's the relational person's way of thinking through a problem and solving the problem. So there's so many aspects to it that if we can just kind of understand what someone else needs and how they process information, we can avoid a lot of conflict.
Absolutely. So the first thing that you have to, we've given you some information, but you have resources. So the very best thing that you can use is behavioral assessments with this. So it helps you understand, it gives you that impartial third-party view as you're teaching your team to be self-aware of this is who you are, this is where we are, this is how you work together. Maybe you're saying, oh, we don't have conflict. You need an employee engagement survey because that may give you some insight into either A, what is that difficulties, or as you're teaching them, you may say, you know what, I'm hearing a lot from my teams that we're on the right path, but I need to move forward with it. So you've got to make sure that, use your resources. This is something that Omnia can help you with, whether understanding your leadership team better, how your team works together, those engagement surveys, how a manager and direct report works together, all of that comes together as part of that teach component. So we talked about tone with the understanding it. We talked about that information about how to teach them. But then let's talk about tracking the source, because tracking the source, once you say, okay, I've helped self-manage, I've helped build their self-awareness, I've helped build their self-management, we've talked about communication, relationships is helping them just have some team building together. And now you have to make sure that you're tracking the source of the conflict. So one of the ways that you can track your source is through technology. But when we talk about this, it's not just tracking the source of technology, which we have the engagement survey that can help you with. It's also understanding it, right, Wendy? We've got to understand what the problem is.
Yeah, absolutely. So technology, oftentimes it's like, I call it like a hard answer. So is this something that is broken and we need to fix? Or is there something that we need to have a workaround for whatever technological problem we've got? So what can we do to change it? Because a lot of times people get very frustrated when things aren't working as fast as they should, or they get a little outdated, things like that. So again, communication comes into it. Here's a budget, here's what we can change. And if we can't change something or we can't update it right away, what can we do to work around it so that we can help eliminate some of the sources of conflict and frustration that people feel when their technology isn't working as great as they would like for it to. Same with like organizational stuff. So organizational, it's like processes. Is there anything that we can change? Is there anything that we're doing that we haven't changed? So things are getting a little stale, they're getting outdated. Some of the processes that we use internally just don't mesh with the times. Can we fix that? So it's like the slide says, it can be very situational. It can resolve in time, or it's something that we need to go ahead and say we have to adjust this process. Like Kim's saying, we want to understand what that source is, because a lot of times conflict will breed based on these things that we aren't even thinking about. So an organizational process, a technological failure, and then knowledge. Are we making sure that our team has all of the training and resources they need to be effective in their jobs? Because sometimes somebody might come to them upset because something didn't get done, and they're like, well, I didn't know. Nobody told me I had to do that. Nobody showed me how to do that. And so now you've got even more conflict, because it's like, well, I was supposed to know this, and I don't. So now I look foolish, and so is mad at me because I didn't do it right. So we really want to make sure that everybody has the training that they need, the access to whether it's a peer mentor or a leader who can answer questions when they need help or they get confused. Because knowledge to me is honestly one of the most important ones, because it's going to cause a lot of problems if people feel like they were cheated out of what they need to know and now they're embarrassed with a coworker. So education, training is huge. and then peers, making sure that we set expectations and understand each other. And we talked a lot today about sales and service and understanding why we are the way we are and thinking about things from other people's perspective so that we can communicate better. And if we work with our team and set those expectations of understanding who we are, how we like to receive information, how we like to talk things out, it will help going forward when we do have maybe some simple source of conflicts that they can even just solve together on their own without having to come to you. But the behavioral assessment too, I think, is the best place to start, because then you're understanding each individual on your team. So here at Omnia, for example, we have our behavioral graph outside of our office. So it's almost a visual reminder before you walk into someone's office, like, okay, I'm walking into a highly detailed person's office, so here's what I need to be prepared for. And I think having those expectations and understanding who people are will go a long way.
Oh, I agree with that completely. And I look at, like, whenever I go into Wendy's office, because we are exactly the opposite, I will take a deep breath and go, okay, I know I've got to give her more details than I'm used to. Let me take a deep breath. Let me go ahead and come prepared to answer the questions that she wants, and then be prepared to give her some time to think about it. So I try to give her as much heads up as possible. And so as leaders, you set that tone for it. So you've got to remember, don't forget, one, recognize the individual strengths and challenges, especially if you have someone that you know is doing a great job. Maybe they need that confidence. Maybe they need to just know, we're completely different, but I appreciate what you're doing. And your skill is necessary for the success of the company. Recognize those potential obstacles, whether it's within a department or, that inner team dynamics, or if it's between person to person, and help know what motivates and demotivates your employees. Then you have to keep them accountable. So we can recognize it, and be self-aware. But if you're not holding yourself and your team accountable to manage that, then you're going to continue to have conflict in a stoppable team. So make sure that you're stating those non-negotiables, whether it's conversation, whether it's teaching them how to have that resolution, and then facilitate those conflict resolutions. And then last but not least, you as a leader drive your team. So communicate your vision, your expectations, and then give feedback. So your vision needs to include, what are you expecting out of the team and why are they doing it? Because at the end of the day, you want an amazing team, because when you have sales and service, or, production and deliver, whatever it is, coming together, at the end of the day, you want happy and engaged customers. If your teams are coming together and they're working together and they understand that their challenges complement each other to make this team, because no one can be all things to all people. When you have a happy and engaged customer, they're going to continue to buy. They're going to give that word of mouth of, go see Kim, go see Wendy. They're going to refer people, and they're going to increase revenue. And that's what we want. No one is in business just to be in business. We've got to make sure that we're making money, that we're covering expenses, that we're turning a profit. So having your team, the individuals understand each other, helping them understand how they work together, is going to generate that business for happy and engaged customers. Like Wendy said earlier, sales may say, I bring them in, but service is going to keep them. So we've got to work together. So I want to open it up for any questions. You can type them in the questions and comments in the chat box. As you're typing that in, takeaways, you can download a copy of this presentation. If you make sure that in the helpful links, you give us some feedback on our webinars, or you sign up for our next one, Transform Your Workplace Culture from Toxic to Terrific. And also, we, as part of our consulting company and services, if you're interested in the engagement surveys, or you say, Kim, can you and Wendy have a conversation with me and my team and help us understand those inner office dynamics? Absolutely. just reach out to Wendy or myself. We're happy to help you with that. One question that we're always asked is that can you change that atmosphere of where someone is like they just can't seem to get along and we've got those silent? Absolutely. It takes a lot of work. It's going to take time, but remember, you as the leader drive that. So one, to be open and honest about and transparent about your struggles and your challenges and how you've overcome them to create that environment for others. So I know that we're coming short on time. I don't see any other questions. If you do have some questions, you can reach out to Wendy or myself. Thank you very much for being here. Wendy, do you have any closing thoughts?
Just thank you so much for coming. I hope you found it helpful, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.